Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friend. I hope you're doing so well today, and I hope this episode will warm your heart and make you that much better today. We are going to talk about something that I find is just so common with the women and in the marriages that my clients have. And it's kind of a tragedy because it causes so much unnecessary pain, so much unnecessary just struggle in a marriage. And this is what I call the relationship is fragile syndrome. Or it's kind of this sense of like our love is fragile. And I call it a syndrome because it is kind of rampant. It's a really common issue. Now it's a syndrome that can easily be healed. So that's the good news. And that's what I'm going to help you with today. But first I want to talk a little bit about what does this look like? What is this? The relationship is fragile syndrome. So it's kind of like this underlying sense that many of us have, that many women have, that our relationship with our partner is not sturdy, strong, resilient, and able to handle like our humanness, right? Or able to handle conflict, or able to handle harder moments. And one of the kind of trademark signs that this is going on is this sense of like, he doesn't love me enough, right? There's not enough love there for this to, for us to survive any little, what I call the bumps, the miscommunications, the arguments, even the little like criticisms that you might have of each other, right? It's like this sense that the relationship's going to die if XYZ, right? If I'm not really careful, if I'm just myself, right? If I'm really honest with him, if I tell him the truth about this or that, things are going to be bad or we're going to fall apart unless I get better, unless I am kind and sweet all the time, or he makes it really obvious that he loves me, unless I can feel him adoring me all the time. And this can show up in different ways, but kind of the general overall theme here is the relationship won't survive unless a sort of set of ideal behaviors are displayed from your end or his end. So when this is going on, this relationship is fragile syndrome thing, it really can lead to all sorts of issues, obviously, right? It can really keep you on edge. It can really help lead to you avoiding having hard conversations. It can really inflate conflict rather than deflate it, right? Because you're either avoiding conflict or hard discussions until you kind of boil over, right, and explode, or each little upset is a big threatening deal, right? Each little conflict is a big threatening deal. And so if each little conflict feels like that, it's going to make that conflict that much harder and more difficult, right? It makes a molehill into a mountain, in other words, and harder to resolve, of course, and come up with solutions for, right? And it ultimately makes you really unable to relax into yourself, feel calm, be fully open, and, be your really authentic self, in other words. And it keeps you distant from your partner, and really not feeling the love that is there, right? Not able to sink into really the deep joy of the love that's between you. And again, this relationship is fragile syndrome. It's really what I see most of the time is that it's built on this sense of the love isn't strong enough here to carry us through being real, being human together, having hard moments. So it's really built on a sense of a lack of love. But really take note here, this does not mean that there is a lack of love. It's not a fact. If you're afraid or if you fear like that your partner doesn't love you enough, or that you have this sort of sense of that the relationship is a little fragile, that your love is fragile, this is coming from a fear. This is coming from a certain part of your brain, right? And it's very common. I see this all the time. And really what's happening is that so many of us are simply overlooking the love that's there in our relationships, right? Or we're misinterpreting, this might be you might be misinterpreting what you see and hear from your partner, or what you don't see and don't hear from him, right? Like the kind words, the frequent I love yous, the invitations to go on dates together, to spend quality time together in the evenings, to have discussions about your feelings. You might be misinterpreting that as a lack of love, right? As a lack of your partner being invested in the relationship. When I say misinterpreting, I don't mean something's wrong with you for misinterpreting it, right? Our brains are interpretation machines and they misinterpret often. This is part of the human condition. And sometimes it really just comes from past experiences, right? That have nothing to do with your current partnership, right? Like, for example, an old relationship, or, your parents' relationship, and like hard things that you witnessed there. And especially if your parents divorced or had an affair, right? Or even movies that we watch and stories about partners cheating or just being, having a bad relationship, and really just carrying that over, that fear of that over into this relationship that you're in. I had a client recently who comes to mind who really had a very loving, faithful partner who was all in, adored her. But because of some of her things she had heard in the past from her friends and other people in her lives experiences, not even necessarily her own experience, she couldn't believe that this man she was with wouldn't cheat on her, right? And that he was really in this relationship and in love with her. Yeah. And when we have these past stories or these perceptions or experiences that in our past, that can really color how we see the present, right? So in any case, like this client, once we get this idea in our head that things are fragile, right? That if this is happening, it might mean things aren't secure and there's not enough love there, right? That this idea that our partner's love might not be strong enough, that he's not all in this relationship, like in a deep way. This is what happens. We start seeing evidence for that everywhere. We start confirming our own fears. So what we're actually doing, this is what the brain does, is it starts looking for what we don't want to see. In other words, it starts looking for evidence of the exact opposite thing that we want, right? If we want to feel like there's tons of love there, but we're afraid there isn't, and we believe there might not be, we will keep seeing and finding evidence to prove that he doesn't really love us. In other words, if we fear a lack of love, we will see and experience a lack of love, right? This is how the brain works. Our brains, our sort of default brains, our primal brains, they're kind of like that malware software, right? Or like programs on a computer that scan for viruses, right? It's like with a click, with a fear, it's often running, right? And it will find that malware program will find usually some viruses, right? It will find the bad things. It will find what shouldn't be there, right? And it's really the same with our brain. They're like run on this autopilot. But the thing about our brains is that our brain finds things that aren't even there, right? It sees falsely. It sees lack when there isn't any, right? So it sees a lack of love, even if there isn't any. This is really important to understand. So I'm going to underscore this, right? This is what our primal, fear-based, what I call lizard brain, this is what our lizard brains do on default, okay? I talked about this much more in depth in, I think it's episode 6. It's a key episode to listen to. If you haven't, go back definitely and listen to this. But the lizard brain, the primal brain, always looks for what's wrong and missing, right? If your brain does this, it doesn't mean anything's wrong with it. It means you have a normal human brain, a normal, highly sensitive brain, right? So what happens is it can tend to look for how and where our partner's love is missing, right? And again, like that computer malware scanner thing, it will always find evidence for what it seeks. It will always find what it's looking for. This is called the confirmation bias of the brain, okay? So it really makes it so that we don't tend to naturally give the benefit of the doubt to our partner that he does love us, that he wants us to be happy, that he wants us to feel loved, that he loves us, right? It's like, nope. See, he's not loving me. See, he didn't text me today. See, he snapped at me. He doesn't love me. See, he hasn't asked me out on planned a date for us in months. See, he must not love me. There's not enough love here. Uh-oh. Our relationship's going to fall apart. Obviously, I'm being a little overly dramatic here. Inside your brain might not sound quite like that, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating it for clarity's sake, for making a point, right? But so even if your brain doesn't sound quite like this overall, I know that there's so many of you listening that have some of this going on. So if you do have an underlying sense that I don't trust deeply in the love in our marriage, then this is really important to take a look at and take on what I'm going to say now, which is really about what do we do with this, right? If our brains work in this way and we feel insecure in our marriages and the love that's there, and we know it's potentially really hurting our marriage, what can we do about it, right? So what we need to start with is getting a way more realistic picture of what's really going on, right? Then I'm going to give you some more actionable steps so that you can start feeling your partner's love and feeling like the love is secure. And your marriage has really at its core a strong love to hold it securely together, right? A love that you can build upon to, ultimately really explode the depth of love you experience on a day-to-day basis. So in other words, if you feel like you maybe have a little bit of the relationship is fragile syndrome, it's not a problem, right? We've just got to have some understandings and work with our brain so that we can not feel that way and actually have that foundation to build an amazing marriage on. Okay, so I'm going to help you do that here. So here's the reality check. Here's the realistic picture in about I would say 99% of marriages. So I'm assuming that as I speak to you, you have a good human as a partner, right? Not an evil one, not a very hurting human. And since that's the case, as a decent human being, your partner wants the person he chose as his life partner, that's you, to be happy with him. That's basic human psychology. Your partner, your man, wants to love you, and he wants you to feel his love for you. He wants you to be happy because of him and with him. Deep down, that's what he wants. And if you aren't feeling that from him, again, it's almost certainly not because his love for you isn't there and he doesn't want those things, right? If he's not making that clear and showing you in an obvious way that he loves you and he wants you to feel his love, right? And he wants you to be happy with him. There are many reasons for this, okay? And I want you to be clear here. None of them have to do with you not being adorable, lovable, and amazing. Okay, they have to do with him. And this is because human psychology is complex, right? So there's so many things here, his thought patterns, his nervous system, his own brain, his own lizard primal brain, right? The way he's been taught to express himself. This is big, right? We talked about this in episode 50 about men's emotional maturity. Go back and listen to that. But how he's been conditioned by society, by his family to express himself, to express his love, right? In other words, his inhibitions, right? His own discomfort with being vulnerable, even his stress levels. All of this can lead to him not loving you in a way that feels clear as day to you, to not loving you in an obvious way. And also, he might not consciously recognize how much he wants you to know he loves you, even though he really does deep down. He very well may have shoved that awareness down out of shame over not naturally knowing how to make it clear to you, right? This capacity to love just in the way you want to be loved, that doesn't necessarily come naturally to these men, to any partner, right? As we talked about in episode 50. So he might have some shame about that. He might know he's not loving you in the way that you want to be loved, and that isn't necessarily helping him suddenly do it, right? Shame closes down our capacity to live up to who we want to be, right? And he also, this is also very important, he might have some very specific competing parts of him, just like you, right? Like lizard brain again, that make it hard to show how much he cares and how much he wants you to know he cares and loves you, right? Again, like we have these brains, right? We do have what I call the wise brain. And I like to think of this even as like, this is our heart, our more conscious, evolved, loving part of us, right? This part wants to love freely and fully. We all have this. He does too, right? And we also all have, again, what I call the lizard brain, right? This really is this reactive part of us that acts out of fear. For example, fear of what others will think of us, right? It acts out of preconditioned habits. And when I say lizard brain, I oftentimes actually include the nervous system in this, okay? Like the fight or flight, freeze, nervous system, right? Again, those are some preconditioned habits that show up there, right? It acts out of old hurts in an attempt to protect us from physical or emotional pain, right? So a little bit more about this part. This part of us is driven by quick fixes, instant comfort, survival instincts, rather than long-term fulfillment and joy, right? So it has this tendency to rear its head in us humans often or regularly, right? If we are not living with a whole lot of self-awareness, which many of us aren't. Many of our partners aren't. But here's the thing, even with a bunch of self-awareness, it will still, I promise, show up, right? Our lizard brain will rear its head. So this is what I find really interesting. Even a partner, even a man who's consciously and lovingly able to tell you how much he wants you to know he loves you, who wants to show his love for you deeply, even he will forget to live that out often, right? Even he will sometimes be overtaken by this reactive, lizardy part of him, right? And then it will be hard potentially to see his love for you, right? And I talk about this because my own husband does this, right? At his most conscious and relaxed moments. And I'd say so he's someone who has developed some self-awareness in large part with along the ride with me, right? So even at his conscious and relaxed moments, he's able to speak really clearly about how much he wants to be an amazing partner to me and wants me to feel so loved, right? And even then, there are still multiple times a week where he doesn't live that out, right? Where he gets caught up in, this or that urge of the moment, or his pleasure seeking of the moment, or that lizard reactive brain, right? Or like the cascade of his own stressful emotions, right? And in those moments, his desire to love me and show that to me, it doesn't play out in a tangible way, right? In his words or in his actions, right? In those moments, he doesn't act out his love for me, right? And so I could easily miss seeing his love for me in those moments, right? Especially if I'm kind of caught up in my own primal reactive brain and nervous system responses, stress responses, right? But I often don't. Sometimes, for sure, being a human, right? But I often don't miss it because I've trained my mind and my heart to see his love for me and therefore feel it deeply, right? Even in these moments. So this is the good news, right? When you've done that too, you won't even need to know the reasons he isn't expressing his love, right? All of these reasons I've listed, like he's stressed out, he'd never learned how to express his care, he might be feeling shame. Like you don't even need to know those reasons necessarily, why he's not showing his love and care in a way that's most easy for you to feel and receive, right? You'll be able instead to just trust that it's there, to feel that it's there, right? But what I see most often, and what I used to do myself, was sort of this is going to be interesting, but what I call using the love languages concept. Most of you have heard of the love languages against yourself and against the love in your relationship. I see this so often. I see women make this mistake. Really only focusing on, this is my love language and he should speak it, right? Like using the love languages in a way that's like identifying your own love language, but then being like, this is my love language and my partner really needs to start speaking it so I can feel loved, right? Instead of learning to understand your partner's love language. Right? So love languages, as a side note, I'm sure if you haven't heard about this, just go look it up. It's a great idea. It's an interesting idea and concept, but I want to emphasize that it's an idea and not a rock solid fact, right? So in other words, it's a tool that's meant to increase love and understanding in our relationships, but it's so often misused, right? It's so often used against love. Right? And this is one of the primary ways that we use this love languages concept against the love in our marriages. So I want you to be really careful with love languages. So you aren't using this idea of love languages to deepen your sense of the relationship is fragile, right? Because when you do this, when you focus on the ways he's not showing his care, the times that he's not loving you in your best way of receiving love, you will miss out on all the care, all the love that is there, and really the chance to know it and see it and feel it deeply like you want to. Yeah. So instead, to feel it yourself, right? To really feel the love that's there and to counter this relationship is fragile syndrome, I want you to try out using these remedies. So step 1 is to answer these questions right now. Number 1, do you, somewhere deep in your heart, know that your significant other loves you? And I invite you to answer this question from that wise brain, right? From that higher brain. Again, from the heart. Another question is, has he told you that he loves you in words or in his own way in the last year or so? And again, answer that from the wiser brain. Many of you will feel that the answer is yes. Okay, so if that's you, here's what I have to offer you. It's really time to trust that answer. It's time to trust your heart's knowing about his love for you, and to trust his words, right? To trust that his love is there. And of course, if his love is there, of course, he wants you to feel it and feel happy because of him and his love for you, right? Even if it's hard for him to show it or say it. Okay. So again, understand that if he's not showing it as often as you'd like, it really might just be a vulnerable thing for him to be able to clearly articulate it. Or there's sometimes just the stress of life and all those things getting in the way. Right? And if he's been told, this is important, he's falling short at it, at loving you the way you want to be loved, right? You may have told him that. Other people may have told him that in the past, right? That's potentially making it even harder for him to clearly show you. Okay? So, he loves you. Believe in that and that he wants to. And understand it just might not look exactly the way you thought it would. Now, if you couldn't answer yes to those questions, or you just feel unsure that he loves you deeply, right? I want to invite you to just go out on a limb and assume it's true and that you've just been unable to see it clearly. Right? Again, because it doesn't look the way you thought it looked, because you have this lizard brain that tends to overlook the positive and focus on what's missing, right? So start assuming it's true that his love is really there. And try this for a month, right? And notice what changes as you do. And here's like an extra tip for anyone who wants to believe that a little bit deeper, wants to be able to see it, is actually to help your brain see it and feel it, right? So this is it. This is how to do that. Go on what I call a treasure hunt, where you look for clues and evidence that your partner loves you and wants you to be happy. And in order to do this effectively, you're going to need to expand your definition of what that might look like from him. Right? Beyond the current definition you have, like his love and care might be easier for him to show, for example, through working hard to support you and the family financially, right? By bringing in the firewood or fixing the car, right? In other words, by expressing his love in his love language, right? By sitting by you while looking at his phone, but like by being there with you on the couch next to you, right? It could even be, this might be a stretch for some of you, it could even be getting somewhat defensive when you point out something he did wrong because he feels misunderstood and he really wants you to see him as good, right? That can totally be a true sign that he cares about you. He values you seeing him as good. Yeah. So stretch your definition of what loving you can look like. So really step 3, that other piece was step 2, is no matter what your answer to the questions in step 1 are, I want you to try this piece 2. Get curious and ask yourself what might be going on for your partner that would make it difficult for him to show his love for you consistently or even at all, or in the way that it's most easy for you to receive, i.e. your love language. And I want you to be careful here that you make sure you don't make it about you, right? That he isn't showing love in this particular way because of you. It's not about you. You are infinitely lovable just as you are. So be curious about what's going on for him and don't make it about you. When we really open up to being curious, what's so interesting and amazing is that we like our own hearts can move into more lightness, right? More compassion and more clear seeing of this human being that we love, this man that we love. Yeah. And here's the thing, that openness and lightness and compassion and curiosity, this can allow our own hearts really to swell up with more love, right? So we can feel this love ourselves, right? And that's what we most want to feel, is this love, to feel love. Yeah. And as a bonus, on top of feeling love for this human we've chosen as our partner, from that place, we're really open enough and relaxed enough and loving enough to actually be able to sense the love that's there, right? In him, right? To feel connected to this person that we love, right? This person who loves us, however imperfectly he expresses it. So those are really important steps to take to begin to feel much more secure in the love that is the foundation of your marriage. And if you feel that it's your love that's fragile in the relationship, I want to challenge that. Love isn't fragile or not fragile, right? Love is also not something that just happens to you. It's something that you choose and maintain and cultivate on purpose, right? And you can feel as much love as you want to. And if you don't know that right now, it's really just because you've not understood this before, right? I didn't understand this in the past. And you maybe haven't then therefore chosen to cultivate that love for your partner on purpose. And the best news ever is that you can totally begin right now, today, in this moment, cultivating that love. A great little starting place for that is episode 40 about micro moments of love. So feel free to go listen to that episode if you want to deepen your love and feel the strength of your love. So trusting that the love is there in your marriage, both yours and his, is really so foundational to having a good marriage and to having an amazing marriage. Because really it's from there, from that foundation, that you can address all the challenges that might come up with a deep sense of safety, right? A deep sense of security. And you can really grow your communication skills, solve for problems, be your most authentic, full-hearted, sensitive self. And all of this will ultimately really magnify more and more every single day the depth of loving, connected physical and emotional intimacy that you and your partner experience together. So if you are ready for all of that, I would love to support you deeply in getting there So I invite you to come coach one-on-one with me. It starts simply by applying for and scheduling your free consult call. I will put the link to do so in the show notes, or you can head over to my website, www.lifeisworthloving.com, and click the Work With Me button, and then scroll down to the Get Started with a Call button, and you'll be on your way. I want to sum this episode up simply by saying, you yourself get to determine whether your relationship feels fragile or if it feels deeply, solidly, lovingly secure. Be oh so well.